The moment Sergeant Mason Briggs punched the 12-foot lizard in the throat with a stale protein bar, and it actually worked, the entire galactic arena went dead silent. Not because it was impressive, though it was. Not because the creature started convulsing dramatically, which it did. But because on the big screen, magnified for 1 billion species across 50 planets, his dog tag had swung loose from under his tattered shirt. And what it revealed made several high-ranking council members simultaneously choke on their ceremonial wine. One alien emperor even dropped dead on the spot. See, that wasn't just any Earth military tag. It was a relic, a code, a forgotten key to something far worse than death. It was the reason the galaxy had tried to forget Earth in the first place. Mason had no idea. He was too busy dodging a 3-headed hammer-wielding squid with a grudge and an allergy to sarcasm. He ducked, swerved, and somehow managed to trip on his own shoelace, sending the alien beast flying into an electrified cage wall with a loud sizzle and a smell suspiciously like burnt marshmallow. The crowd roared, unsure whether they were watching an accident or the galaxy's clumsiest strategic genius. Mason groaned from the floor, rolled onto his back, and muttered, "This better not be hell. If hell smells like alien bacon, I'm not staying." 2 hours earlier, Mason had been unconscious in a stasis pod, floating in a ship that didn't belong to Earth. When he woke up, the only greeting he got was a robotic voice announcing, "Specimen 31345, human male. Category, soft flesh curiosity. Dropping to Arena Sector 9 in 10, 9. The floor opened up mid-countdown, and he plummeted through a gravity funnel with all the grace of a refrigerator tossed out a plane. He landed face-first in red sand, his arms flailing, pants halfway zipped, combat boots missing, and absolutely no idea how he got there. The crowd above was already chanting something that sounded like lunch orders but probably translated to "Die Monkey Die." The Galactic Council had a tradition. Every few years, they'd spice up the usual arena matches by tossing in what they called primitive anomalies, species too underdeveloped to pose a threat, yet just developed enough to scream in entertaining ways. Humans were rare commodities, mostly because Earth had mysteriously gone dark a few centuries back and no one wanted to investigate. Too much trouble. But someone had found this one. Frozen, misplaced, still wearing an ancient military uniform with faded Earth flags and a metal dog tag that had somehow survived everything. Mason stood up, sand in places sand should never be, and took in the scene. Giant steel walls curved around the pit like a coliseum. Alien creatures snarled in cages above, waiting their turn. A floating camera orb hovered near his face, blinking. He stared at it and said, "I have no idea where I am, but if this is an alien bachelor party, I want the cake, not the stripper." The first enemy was dropped in almost immediately. A hulking brute with claws, tusks, and breath that could melt iron. Mason, without weapons or shoes, did what any rational human would do. He screamed like a man who'd stepped on a Lego barefoot and ran. The alien chased him, amused, until Mason spotted a loose pipe sticking out of the wall. He yanked it free, jabbed it blindly as the creature lunged, and by sheer luck, or some guardian angel with a twisted sense of humor, the pipe lodged in the beast's open mouth and got stuck. The alien choked, stumbled, and passed out with a thud. The crowd erupted. Mason, panting, spat sand and said, "Is this normal for Tuesdays?" From a private suite high above the arena, several counselors watched with curiosity that rapidly turned into anxiety. One particularly pale creature with 9 eyes leaned forward, squinting at the screen. Pause the feed. Zoom in. Enhance. They focused on the human's neck. The dog tag. Someone ran a scanner across the metal and froze. The code etched into the back wasn't standard. It wasn't even current. It belonged to something archived. Something sealed. The encryption pattern pulsed faintly in the camera feed, an ancient Earth military beacon protocol, long thought extinct. The assistant archivist, a gelatinous life form with 12 doctorates, squeaked, "That's impossible." That project was dismantled. Classified beyond alpha level. Another counselor hissed, "Who authorized this human? Who found him?" Down in the arena, Mason leaned against a metal wall, trying to catch his breath as the next enemy was lifted into the airlock above. He stared up at the sky, his voice cracking. "Alright, I get it. Alien Fight Club. Fun. You guys ever heard of Geneva Conventions? No? Cool. They dropped a telepathic worm into the ring. It snarled and launched itself at Mason. He dodged, barely, then reached into his pocket and pulled out what looked like a protein bar wrapped in space ration foil. Mason hurled it like a grenade. It hit the worm in the mouth. A second later, the worm began convulsing. What the hell was in that bar? Mason blinked. I knew that thing was expired, but damn. He didn't even have time to process it before the big screen behind him lit up, not with the alien stats, but with a flashing symbol. A symbol no one had seen in 3 centuries. A stylized eagle with outstretched wings and a starburst behind it. Earth's forgotten crest. Every monitor across the Galactic Council's reach echoed with alarms. Deep in data vaults, old records blinked awake. Hidden files unlocked. A sleeping ghost stirred. The human in the pit was no accident. And his dog tag was not just metal. It was a key. A call. A threat. And Earth was listening. The crowd had no idea what to make of him. Somewhere between falling face-first into the sand and using expired rations as biological weapons, Sergeant Mason Briggs had gone from pathetic throw-in to the most watched thing on galactic entertainment streams. Billions of viewers tuned in daily now, not for the usual carnage, but to see what ridiculous, impossible thing the human would do next. One channel even started a show called Guess What He'll Use as a Weapon this time. The latest winning entry was a lunch tray wrapped in duct tape and sharpened with a spoon. Mason, for his part, was exhausted. Not from the fights. Not even from the lack of decent food or the constant threat of being ripped apart by creatures with more teeth than good sense. No, he was exhausted from the sheer absurdity of it all. Every time he thought he was out of tricks, the universe threw another curveball. Like the time he defeated a 3-armed gladiator by faking a sneeze and then kicking it in the knee while it panicked about disease. Or the time he short-circuited a robotic menace by spitting on an exposed wire and yelling basic physics at it. Somehow, it kept working. The aliens thought it was strategy. The audience thought it was comedy. The council thought it was terrifying. No species should have that much luck and that much nerve combined in one meat sack. The arena staff started calling him the Monkey of Chaos. He wore the name proudly. It beat being called Soft Flesh Curiosity. They tried to give him better weapons after a while, but he kept refusing. Not out of pride, just out of spite. He liked watching them get confused when he asked for duct tape, a shoelace, and chewing gum instead of plasma rifles. One afternoon, as he lounged on a crate made of alien bones, drinking something purple and questionably fizzy, a new opponent entered the arena. It was a sleek, muscular creature with no visible face and blades instead of hands. The crowd gasped. The Executioner, they called it. No one had lasted more than 60 seconds against it. Mason sighed, stood up, stretched like he was getting out of bed, and muttered, "All right, blender hands, let's dance." The fight lasted 12 minutes. Mostly because Mason kept talking. He distracted the Executioner with questions about its diet, childhood, and whether it ever got tired of always being pointy. At one point, he faked a dramatic monologue about human heartbreak just to confuse it long enough to wrap its legs in an old banner and trip it onto its own blade. The crowd went absolutely wild. One alien commentator declared him a strategic genius. Another suggested he might be a god in disguise. A third broke down sobbing on air, overcome by the beauty of his storytelling. Behind the scenes, however, things were less entertaining. The Galactic Council was nervous. His dog tag continued to emit encrypted pulses, silent to all but the most ancient systems. The code was spreading. Echoes of old Earth satellites buried in forgotten corners of space began to wake. Forgotten warning beacons blinked once more. A pattern was emerging, and it pointed directly back to the arena. They sent spies into the crowd. They tried hacking his feed. Nothing worked. Even worse, a growing underground network of rebel species began rallying behind his image. Posters of his confused, slightly annoyed face popped up in resistance cells. The phrase "Monkey of Chaos" was being whispered like gospel. Someone started selling bootleg shirts with his catchphrases, most of which he didn't even remember saying. Mason didn't know any of this. He was too busy arguing with his food dispenser over whether the thing it just served him was soup or weaponized slime. He only realized something was different when one of the med drones that checked him after matches blinked at him 3 times. It wasn't random. It was a code. Morse. Human. 3 short, 3 long, 3 short. SOS. He froze. The drone hovered closer and emitted a low-frequency sound only humans could hear. A voice came through, garbled but recognizable. "You are not alone. We know who you are. Don't trust them. The tag is waking up more than just memories." Before he could respond, the drone buzzed and flew away. Mason stood there, suddenly very aware that he might be in the middle of something far bigger than himself. He looked at his dog tag. It still looked the same. Metal, scratched, old. But now he noticed a faint glow pulsing under the surface. Like a heartbeat. Later that day, during another match, a small alien with wide eyes and too many fingers was tossed into the arena with him. The thing didn't attack. It looked terrified. Mason lowered his stance and waited. The alien stepped closer, hands raised, and whispered, "I know what your tag is. You have to get to the signal tower." "What tower?" "East wall. Old communications array. Hidden behind the flame cannons." "That's behind the elite quarters." "Yes." "They'll fry me alive." "They might not. If you activate the tag at the relay, it'll reach further. Others will hear. Earth might respond." Mason stared at the little alien for a moment, then nodded. "What's your name?" "Florp." "Seriously?" "Yes." "All right, Florp. Stay behind me." The crowd watched in confusion as Mason and Florp staged a fight, complete with fake punches and dramatic yells. Mason even threw himself into a wall at one point to sell it. In the chaos, he stole a guard's access key and memorized the tower's direction. That night, while everyone assumed he was asleep, he crept past the sentries using leftover meat grease as camouflage. He slipped into the restricted zone, climbed a service duct, and finally found himself face to face with the ancient tower. It was dusty, forgotten, and covered in warning labels. He placed his dog tag into a cracked port. Nothing happened at first. Then the tower lit up. Lights surged. A low hum filled the air. And across the stars, Earth listened. At least, he hoped they did. Back in the council chambers, alarms screamed. A dozen systems lit up with the same signal. Old Earth beacons responded. Something dormant had been triggered, and Mason Briggs, barefoot, tired, and holding a sharpened spoon, had just made the biggest mistake of their millennium. Or maybe their salvation. Ask ChatGPT. The arena's mandatory psychological evaluations were usually a formality, designed more to monitor long-term marketable insanity than to offer real therapy. Competitors were routinely scanned, catalogued, and filed under predictable categories like volatile, broken, or meat awaiting slicing. But when Mason Briggs entered the shrink chamber and sat down opposite what could only be described as a floating jellyfish with prescription glasses, the system had no idea how to classify what came next. The jellyfish's voice was calm and gelatinous, like someone trying to speak underwater during a poetry reading. "Please describe your emotional state." Mason squinted. "Hungry. Confused. Mildly gassy. That is not a recognized emotional state." "You've never had bad chili before a gladiator match, have you?" The jellyfish paused, tentacles wiggling. "Fascinating. Would you say you possess an unusual coping mechanism involving sarcasm?" Mason leaned forward. Would you say you look like a balloon animal that made poor life choices? The AI watching the session short-circuited momentarily, trying to categorize that interaction. The psychologist attempted to continue, asking about his past traumas. Mason described surviving military raids, losing friends, and waking up in an alien coliseum surrounded by murder bugs and fans screaming like a soccer match from hell. But every time he reached anything too painful, he cracked a joke. The jellyfish finally noted that the human displayed deep emotional damage buried under multiple layers of denial, wit, and tactical nonsense. In other words, textbook soldier. Possibly very dangerous. After the session, Mason returned to his cell, which he had by now converted into a combination gym, kitchen, and poorly maintained art studio. He used slime paint to draw memes on the walls, most of which no other species could comprehend. Florp visited him shortly after. The small alien had become a regular presence, somehow always finding ways to sneak in under the pretense of tech maintenance or rodent control. Florp brought news. Resistance elements within the arena infrastructure had taken notice of Mason's impact. They wanted contact. Mason was skeptical at first. He had already caused enough chaos by accident. Starting an uprising might take things a bit too far. Then Florp told him what the council really did with prisoners who became too popular. They disappeared. Not because they died. Because they were erased. Memories wiped, bodies recycled, traces deleted from the system entirely. No graves, no warnings, no goodbyes. Just gone. That was all Mason needed to hear. Their first contact happened inside a waste disposal chamber 2 levels beneath the arena. Mason pretended to be vomiting from spoiled rations while Florp tapped a rhythm on the wall. A panel slid open, and 2 shadowy figures emerged. One was a cloaked insectoid with a voice like gravel and moonlight. The other was a thin, bird-like creature who spoke in rapid bursts and constantly checked over its shoulder. They introduced themselves as members of the Broken Worlds, a resistance group made of species whose planets had been broken, enslaved, or wiped clean by council cleansing operations. The insectoid handed Mason a small chip. The chip contained compressed data decoded from the pulses his dog tag had emitted. It revealed the existence of Project Genesis, a long-lost Earth initiative. Genesis was not just a military program. It was a galaxy-wide contingency plan. A web of beacons, safe houses, hidden allies, and fallback weapons in case Earth was ever overrun or betrayed. The Council had discovered it centuries ago and shut it down, or so they thought. Now, because of Mason, it had started to come alive again. Mason sat down against a rusted pipe and stared at the chip in silence. His mind raced with memories. Missions where they found strange alien ruins that no one reported. Orders that were redacted. Technologies they were told to ignore. None of it had made sense back then. Now, it all fit together like puzzle pieces in a box someone forgot to open. He asked the Broken Worlds what they expected him to do. They told him he had already done it. The moment he activated the signal, the resistance cells across space had begun waking up. Some had already attacked council stations. Others had begun hijacking communication networks to spread the truth. Mason's job now was to survive long enough to keep inspiring them. That night, Mason dreamed of Earth. Not the planet as it was, but as he remembered it before deployment. Coffee on cold mornings. The smell of engine oil. Dogs barking. Laughter over poker games. He woke up angry and more determined than ever. If Earth had been betrayed, and if this arena was part of the machinery keeping that betrayal quiet, then maybe tearing it apart was more than just fun. Maybe it was justice. His next match was against a creature called the Maw. The Maw was designed not to fight but to consume. It had no eyes, no limbs, just endless rows of teeth and a scream that cracked walls. The Council wanted a message sent. The human was getting too popular. Time to end the joke. Mason entered the arena, glanced at the Maw and said, "You ever hear of a garbage disposal? I'm about to introduce you to your ancestor." Instead of charging in, he started sprinting in circles, leading the Maw through a gauntlet of traps he had secretly rigged using debris and leftover wiring from previous matches. Each trap slowed the beast, disoriented it, until finally Mason led it into a sealed corridor filled with gas he'd vented from the maintenance ducts. With a single spark, the corridor ignited, and the Maw went silent. When the smoke cleared, Mason limped out, singed and coughing, but very much alive. The crowd went ballistic. But more importantly, he had carved a message into the wall behind him, using his makeshift blade. 3 simple words in English. "We are awake." That night, Florp found him again. This time with tears in his eyes. "You're becoming a legend." Mason shook his head. "I'm just a guy with a spoon and a grudge." But the dog tag pulsed again, brighter than before. Elsewhere, on a dark moon orbiting a forgotten star, a deep storage vault unlocked itself. Lights flickered on. Robotic units powered up, each bearing Earth insignia. Old war machines that hadn't moved in centuries turned their heads toward the sky. One whispered a word in a synthetic voice. "Briggs." Earth wasn't just watching anymore. It was preparing to answer. Ask ChatGPT. The arena's flame cannons had barely cooled from Mason's last match when the whispers began spreading beyond the arena walls. On the fringe planets, in the half-ruined cities orbiting black hole territories, and in pirate stations floating between forgotten moons, the words traveled faster than the sanctioned news feeds. Earth was alive. Earth was calling. And Earth might not be happy. The phrase "monkey of chaos" was no longer a joke. It became a rally cry. Symbols etched on walls, blinking in transmission codes, worn as badges on rebel armor. For the first time in centuries, a single human was rewriting the story the Galactic Council had worked so hard to bury. Deep inside the understructure of the arena, Mason sat cross-legged in what used to be a sewage routing station, now converted into a resistance communication node. The walls pulsed with dim red lights and humming cables. Florp hovered nearby, running diagnostics on a hacked terminal. The insectoid from the Broken Worlds stood behind them with arms folded, silent and unreadable as always. Mason stared at the decrypted data they had pulled from his dog tag. More coordinates had surfaced. More forgotten outposts. One of them matched a location he had once heard mentioned during a classified briefing back on Earth. He was only a corporal then, assigned to a recovery team on a dead moon. His squad found strange architecture buried under the surface, smooth and metallic, humming with energy. The higher-ups sealed it, scrubbed the mission, and reclassified it as a geological survey accident. But he remembered. He realized then that Project Genesis was never just a defense strategy. It was a contingency for something worse. Something Earth saw coming before the galaxy even realized it had teeth. Genesis wasn't about winning wars. It was about surviving extinction. According to the data, Earth had known that the Galactic Council was never a peacekeeping force. It was a power structure designed to erase threats, and humans had been marked as one from the beginning. Mason's tag had not just reactivated hidden installations. It had unlocked a series of buried protocols. Protocols that included sleeper agents, orbital platforms, cloaked listening posts, and something marked only as Override Prime. Mason leaned back and stared at the ceiling. He wondered how many humans had been left scattered across the galaxy. Abandoned, lost, or buried like he had been. And how many still had their tags. Florp handed him a small handheld device with a cracked screen. It showed grainy footage taken from a resistance contact in another system. A black starfield, silent and empty. Then suddenly shapes began emerging. Massive structures with Earth symbols glowing on their side. Battle stations. War carriers. Old tech. But still functional. Mason felt his throat tighten. Earth hadn't been sleeping. It had been hiding. He did not have much time to think about it. The next match was announced, and this time there would be no opponent. The Council had upgraded the threat level. Mason would be placed in a synthetic environment designed to mimic extreme planetary warfare. The simulation would include hostile weather, unpredictable enemy projections, and autonomous drones programmed to adapt and counter every move. The goal was simple: break him, then broadcast it galaxy-wide to dispel the growing myth. He was dropped into the sim arena without warning. One moment he was adjusting his boot, the next he was falling through what felt like a hurricane made of ice and screaming. He landed hard on frozen terrain, the sky a rolling mess of red clouds and flickering energy bolt. Drones appeared immediately, sleek and fast, moving like liquid metal with weapon limbs and glowing sensors. Mason took cover behind a chunk of ice, breathing heavily. He had no weapons, no backup, and the terrain was shifting every few minutes like a bad dream on loop. But he had something else: improvisation. The first drone approached, scanning. Mason waited. At the right moment, he shoved a thermal battery into a crack in the ice and slammed it with a rock. The resulting explosion launched shards into the drone's sensors, blinding it long enough for him to hijack its arm and reprogram its friend or foe logic. One down. 11 more appeared. Over the next hour, Mason turned the entire simulation into a guerrilla warfare zone. He used unstable weather pockets to fry circuits, led enemy units into quicksand, and built makeshift traps from spare parts. The system adapted, but so did he. He was bleeding, limping, running on fumes, but he refused to die. The audience watched in disbelief. What was supposed to be a breaking point turned into a display of creative, relentless survival. It wasn't clean. It wasn't noble. But it was very human. Backstage, the council watched in cold fury. One of the high marshals slammed a fist into a console. Another demanded to know how the human kept adapting. The AI analysts had no answer. The psychological profiles failed to predict his move. The combat simulations ran hundreds of possible scenarios, and none of them included the human surviving past the third wave. Yet here he was, dismantling their machines with rocks, spit, and irrational persistence. The final drone cornered Mason near a crevasse. Its arms glowed with plasma blades. Mason had nothing left. No weapons, no strength, just a rock in one hand and an insult in the other. As the drone lunged, the sky above them cracked open. A beam of light burst through the clouds. The drone froze. Systems scrambled. A high-frequency pulse knocked out its circuit. Mason stumbled back, shielding his eyes. Floating above the battlefield was a small, triangular object. Black, sleek, and ancient. It projected a symbol into the storm. The Earth crest. Then it spoke. Override Prime recognized. Directive unlocked. Awaiting authorization. Mason blinked. What directive? The object responded. Global subversion response initiated. Awaiting final voice confirmation. The simulation broke down around him, glitching and collapsing into digital fragments. Mason was extracted by force. Security guards dragged him back through the halls, more restrained this time, more frightened. His tag was now glowing steadily. It pulsed in sync with the triangular drone that had appeared. Something had changed. Something irreversible. Back in his cell, Florp ran in, panting. "You did it." The beacon answered. Mason was too tired to sit up. "What the hell is Override Prime?" Florp hesitated. "Old Earth Defense Protocol. If activated, it puts every remaining Genesis node in wartime mode. Full autonomy. Offensive action." Mason stared. "So what does that mean for the Council?" "It means Earth just stopped whispering. And started yelling. Ask ChatGPT." They tried to silence him with fire. The Council called it a containment protocol, but the arena knew it by a simpler name: the Resetter. A last resort weapon disguised as a purification event, used only when a competitor became too influential, too unpredictable, or too beloved. It had not been used in over 2 centuries, not since a telepathic exile had convinced half a quadrant to stop paying taxes. Now, Mason Briggs had earned the honor. The crowd was not informed. The cameras would be shut off. No broadcast. No crowd. Just a silent purge, scheduled at dawn. Mason had known something was wrong the moment his handlers started avoiding eye contact. No sarcastic remarks. No commentary. Just silent guards, tighter cuffs, and a new escort pattern. Even Florp had gone missing. He was led through back corridors and lower levels, into a part of the arena that looked more like a tomb than a facility. The walls were ancient, carved with languages no longer used. Cracks ran through the floor. He had been here before, only once, when he first found the relay tower. But now the air felt colder, heavier, like the building itself knew what was coming. They placed him in a circular chamber with no exit. The walls were smooth, seamless. No visible vents, but the air tasted metallic. His dog tag pulsed against his chest like a second heartbeat. He sat in the center and waited. He did not scream. He did not ask questions. He had learned long ago that fear fed these systems more than rebellion ever could. Instead, he spoke softly to the empty room. "I hope you're watching, Earth. I've done what I could. If this is it, then at least make it count." 30 floors above, in the Council's control room, High Marshals gave the order. The resetter initiated. A gas filled the chamber first, invisible but corrosive. Then heat. Extreme, concentrated, designed to peel away skin, bone, even memory. Mason's body convulsed once, then went still. For approximately 30 seconds, Mason Briggs ceased to exist. Then the walls cracked. The gas sensors malfunctioned. The heat signatures reversed polarity. Lights exploded from within the floor. And from the center of the chamber rose a figure shrouded in light and ash, coughing, burned, furious, and alive. The dog tag around his neck had morphed. No longer a simple piece of metal, it now emitted a pulse wave every few seconds. Embedded symbols shifted across its surface, forming languages long forgotten. Override Prime had not just activated, it had evolved. From beneath the arena, systems centuries old powered up for the first time. Sealed doors opened. Defense nodes came online. Automated turrets that had not moved in ages suddenly rotated and locked onto Council guard. The entire infrastructure of the arena began responding to Mason as if he were its architect. Which, in a way, he now was. The dog tag was not just a key. It was a command token bound to the Genesis protocol. And Genesis had decided that Mason Briggs was its authority. Florp returned in chaos. He had barely escaped a council raid on the underground node. His arms were scorched, one eye swollen shut, but he was grinning. "The people saw it," he gasped. "We intercepted the purge feed and broadcast it. Everyone saw you survive." Mason leaned on the wall, half-conscious. That was not surviving. That was divine dumb luck, and maybe a pissed-off satellite from Earth. Either way it worked. The network's gone insane. The broken worlds are mobilizing. Other arenas are rioting. The Council just made you a martyr who refuses to die. Mason managed a weak smile. Finally, some good press. But celebration was short. Resistance nodes sent warnings. The Council was preparing for all-out suppression. They were pulling ships out of reserve, calling in elite hunters, and deploying units known only by codenames. Silent ones, erasers, myth-eaters. Beings bred to eliminate ideas, not just target. The plan was clear. Destroy the arena and bury the legend before it could spread any further. Mason gathered what remained of the resistance fighters within the arena. Broken creatures, patchwork alliances, old enemies now shoulder to shoulder. No one truly trusted each other, but trust was irrelevant. They all knew what was coming, and none of them wanted to die quietly. Florp climbed up onto a table and addressed them with surprising clarity for someone who once cried at the smell of burnt toast. "We cannot win this fight the way they expect. If we hold the arena, they will reduce it to rubble. But if we make it into a symbol, something too loud to ignore, then we become more than survivors. We become a signal." Mason looked around at the mix of battered fighters and misfit monsters. This was not an army. This was a last stand made of desperation and duct tape. But it was something. The battle began at midnight. Council forces dropped from orbit, sleek and disciplined, wrapped in armor that hummed with silent authority. They expected panic. They expected disorder. Instead, they met resistance units who fought like they had nothing left to lose. Explosives hidden in statues. Sonic traps beneath the floor. Booby-trapped food carts. And leading them, a human with burns across his face, no weapons, and a dog tag glowing like a star. The arena became a war zone. Mason moved like a ghost, appearing at weak points, bolstering fighters, laying traps, giving orders. He was not stronger. He was not faster. But he was unpredictable, and that made him lethal. The council forces faltered. Not because they were outmatched, but because they had never fought someone who weaponized chaos with such precision. In the middle of the battle, Florp went down. Shot through the shoulder, bleeding badly. Mason dragged him into cover, yelling for med bots that never arrived. Florp smiled through the pain. You have to finish it. Go to the control spire. Activate the full protocol. Make it irreversible. Mason hesitated. I am not leaving you. You already saved me, Mason. Now save the others. Florp passed out. Mason stood, lifted the tag to his lips, and whispered the command phrase that had been repeating in his dreams since the first time it glowed. Directive Echo 7. The pulse it sent was stronger than anything before. It lit up not just the arena, but systems across multiple sectors. Reactivated satellites, deep code war AI, dormant installations cloaked in asteroid field. The override chain was now fully live. The dog tag had become a beacon, and Earth was now officially on the way. Ask ChatGPT. The stars changed shape that night. No one noticed it at first, not even the council observers stationed in high orbit above the arena, whose job was to monitor gravitational shifts and suppress large-scale energy anomalies. But then the stars began to move, and it became impossible to ignore. What was once distant cosmic dust began to realign, forming sharp edges, unnatural formations, symmetrical clusters of light that pulsed with rhythm instead of randomness. Mason Briggs saw it first through the shattered dome of the arena's upper wall as the battle raged below. He stood at the highest point of the old control spire, bleeding from the temple, dog tag pulsing like a war drum against his chest, and he whispered only one word. Home. The shapes in the sky were not stars. They were ships. Hundreds of them, rising from cloaked positions, deorbiting from lunar shadows and asteroid belts. Sleek black hulls designed for stealth and annihilation. No insignia. No broadcast. No diplomacy. Just presence. They surrounded the sector in a perfect sphere. Not a fleet arriving. A fleet already waiting. Earth had not just heard the signal. Earth had never truly been gone. The Galactic Council's command ships began transmitting emergency codes, frantic calls for immediate evacuation, deployment of diplomatic channels, fail-safe negotiations. None were answered. Instead, a single message was transmitted back, repeated across all frequencies, in a dozen ancient languages, in a voice synthesized to match a human tone recorded centuries ago. Override Prime accepted. Directive confirmed. Earth presence authorized. The pulse that followed knocked out Council communications for over 73 systems. Inside the arena, everything went still. The fighters stopped. The weapons powered down. Even the drones hesitated. Something old had returned, and it demanded silence. Mason stepped out onto the arena platform as a beam of light pierced the clouds above and touched the ground near him. The beam folded open like a flower, revealing a platform of dark metal and a figure stepping out. It wore a suit that was not armor but memory. A living AI interface wrapped in Earth's forgotten insignia. It looked at Mason and saluted. Sergeant Mason Briggs. Directive chain confirmed. You are now acting command of Earth's Vanguard Response Network. Mason stared, still unsure if he was alive or dreaming. Acting command of what? The figure did not blink. Everything. More beams landed across the planet. Earth units deployed with silent precision. Not troops but caretakers of legacy. Technicians, medics, diplomats, and sentient machines built to stabilize chaos, not escalate it. They moved through the battlefield with perfect awareness, disabling weapons, tending to wounded, speaking languages no longer remembered by those who once spoke them. The Council ships tried to flee. A few made it into orbit before encountering a wall of Earth's orbital defenses. Not destroyed, not attacked, just stopped. Their systems shut down mid-flight. They floated, disabled, humiliated, and powerless. The galaxy had turned a page. Back on the ground, Florp awoke in a field hospital surrounded by glowing nanite clouds repairing his tissue. He reached for Mason, panicking until a smooth mechanical voice reassured him. "You are safe. The sergeant is safe. Earth has returned." Mason met with the resistance leaders in what remained of the arena's war room. The mood was cautious. Some feared this was just another form of domination. But Mason made one thing clear. Earth had not come to rule. It had come to expose the truth and remove the rot. He had seen the cost of silence, the price of forgetting. He had survived as a symbol, but he would not allow the galaxy to trade one empire for another. He stood at the front of a crowded transmission chamber, broadcasting a final message to every corner of space. "You were told we were gone. That Earth was lost. Primitive. Forgotten. But we were never gone. We were watching. We saw the pain, the lies, the broken world. And we waited for a reason. That reason is now. You do not need to serve anyone who would erase your voice. You do not need to fight for entertainment. You deserve more. So we offer this: truth, defense, and peace. Choose it. Or choose silence. But do not pretend you were not given the chance." The message went viral in less than an hour. Resistance groups that had fought for decades in the shadows revealed themselves openly. Planetary governments, once forced into compliance under threat of annihilation, declared independence. The arena network collapsed. No more blood matches. No more sacrifices. The council fractured. Many members went into hiding. Some were taken into custody by Earth's response unit. A few surrendered willingly, exhausted from centuries of power built on fear. And Mason? He refused command. He returned to the rebuilt structure near the edge of the old arena and turned it into something different. A school, a medical center, a place where survivors could learn how to rebuild without fear. Florp became its administrator, hobbling around on a new prosthetic leg that made him 2 inches taller and endlessly smug. People came from all over the galaxy to meet the man with the dog tag. The man who turned a joke into a revolution. Some brought him gifts, others brought questions. A few just needed to see him to believe he was real. He always answered with the same shrug. "I got tossed into a pit and decided not to die. The rest just kind of happened." The tag still pulsed sometimes. Quietly now. Not with urgency, but with memory. Mason wore it still, though it no longer glowed the same. Earth systems had decommissioned the beacon, its work done. But Mason kept it because it reminded him that even one forgotten soldier could shake an empire if the moment was right. Years passed. Stories spread. Some true, some exaggerated. They said he once beat a psychic crab using nothing but a wet napkin. That he made peace between rival warlords with a single story. That Earth had crowned him their emperor, and he refused because he liked grilled food and sleeping in. Most stories missed the point. The truth was simpler. He had been forgotten, thrown away, and underestimated. And from that place of nothing, he reminded the galaxy what a human could be. Not perfect, not divine, but impossible to ignore.